Was born in 1949 in Port Coquitlam in British Columbia, which is about 15 miles to the east of Vancouver. He, along with his brother and sister, were raised by their parents on a big pig farm. In the 1970s, their parents passed away, and so the property was handed down to them. Robert and his brother took over the daily operations of the farm, and their sister decided to just move away. Over the next couple of decades, Robert and his brother attempted to run the pig farm, but pretty quickly they stopped taking care of it, and it fell into decline. Neighbors and visitors recalled seeing the pigs that were still there free roaming the property. And as for the brothers, it appeared they had just stopped bathing, and despite walking all day in mud and pig feces, it seemed like they never took off their boots when they went inside. One of the few farm workers that stayed with the Pictons through the farm's decline was a guy by the name of Bill Hiscox, and he said the farm was a really creepy place. And he also said Robert was a really creepy guy that was prone to just totally bizarre behavior, even though he didn't smoke or drink or use any substances. Eventually, the Picton brothers realized they were not cut out to run the pig farm like their family had for generations before them, and they decided their best move was just to sell portions of their land. But neither of them could have guessed just how much their land was worth. From 1994 to 1995, they managed to sell off almost all of their property to an urban developer for over $5 million. And so suddenly, these filthy, failed pig farmers had become millionaires, and neither of them knew what to do with the money. After a year of just sitting on the money and not doing much with it, they decided they wanted to do some good with their money. And so they established an official charity in 1996 called the Piggy Palace Good Times Society. Their charity's purpose, at least on paper, was to help raise money for various organizations that they deemed worthy by running events like dances and shows. And while that might have been their original intention for this charity, what it ultimately became was a guise to host these wild drug and alcohol-fueled parties inside of their slaughterhouse, which, even though it wasn't being used anymore because they were no longer really doing any pig farming, it still conspicuously had big hooks coming down from the ceiling and bloodstains all over the ground underneath them. These Piggy Palace parties became infamous in Coquitlam, drawing crowds of up to 2,000 people, predominantly bikers, drug addicts, and prostitutes from the poverty-stricken downtown east side of Vancouver. Robert had become familiar with that part of Vancouver because he used to go through there all the time to dispose of animal waste products at their rendering plant. Once the Piggy Palace charity was in full swing, Robert started going back into that neighborhood where he would cruise down the 10-block strip called the Load Track and would attempt to recruit people to come to his parties. Most of the people he recruited were down on their luck women who only agreed to go because he was offering them food and money and drugs and alcohol. At the same time Robert was running this recruiting campaign, women from the downtown east side began disappearing in droves. These disappearances were noticed by the men and women in the downtown east side, but they didn't report them because they had a general distrust of the police and of authority figures in general. But as more and more and more women disappeared from the downtown east side, rumors of a serial killer operating in that area started to circulate. Residents began only going outside if they could walk around in a big group of people, and everybody was just totally on edge, keeping careful lookout for anything odd about the neighborhood, people that shouldn't be there, cars that shouldn't be there. But despite this heightened security, women continued to go missing at a rapid rate, and nobody knew why. When the police were finally contacted about all these missing women, their response was lacking, to say the least. Since there were no bodies of these missing women, the police said it was reasonable to assume that the women were to blame, that their lifestyles must have caught up with them and they either ran off somewhere or perhaps they overdosed somewhere and their bodies just haven't been found yet. Despite residents of the downtown east side saying, no, this is different, there's something wrong here, the police basically said, we're not getting involved. When the newspapers found out about this totally apathetic response from the police, they criticized them for intentionally deprioritizing these missing women because the majority of them were drug addicts and prostitutes, and so therefore weren't worthy of a full investigation. The police rejected this claim. On the evening of March 22nd, 1997, so 1 year after the Piggy Palace had been stood up and they started throwing all these parties, and 1 year after dozens of women have gone missing from the downtown east side, the Pictons' neighbor heard a frantic knock on their front door. They ran over, they opened it up, and what they saw was this woman who was hunched over with one hand on her bleeding stomach, and dangling from her wrist was a handcuff. The neighbor was obviously shocked at what they were seeing, but they quickly ushered the woman in and they called her an ambulance. The woman was rushed to the hospital where she immediately was put into emergency surgery. Afterwards, while she was in recovery, she told her nurses that her name was Wendy and she had been at one of those Piggy Palace parties, and one of the owners of the farm, Robert Picton, had tried to put a handcuff on her, and when he did, she fought back. He drew a knife, he stabbed her in the stomach, she was able to get the knife back, she stabbed him in the face before turning and running out the door and making it to the neighbor's house. Right after she told this story, Robert Picton actually showed up at the exact same hospital with a serious laceration on his face that was consistent with being stabbed. The medical staff had already called the police, who showed up minutes later, and when they went inside, they searched Robert and they found in one of his pockets a handcuff key. And that handcuff key opened the handcuff that was still on Wendy's wrist. And so when the police saw that, they arrested Robert on attempted murder. While Robert was in custody, he explained to officers that Wendy was lying. She was a drug addict and she had come to one of their Piggy Palace parties and he had caught her trying to rob them. He had confronted her, she drew a knife, and that's when a struggle ensued and both of them got stabbed. And Robert said he was just lucky to be alive. The police believed him and dropped all of his charges and let him go. When Robert got back to the farm, Bill Hiscox, the one worker who still worked for the Pictons, he grew very suspicious of Robert. He had read all about the missing women from the downtown east side, and he knew Robert regularly went over there to pick up women and brought them back to his parties. And Bill just always had that gut feeling that something was off about Robert. And so he sat on this gut feeling for a couple of months until finally he decided he had to tell someone. And so he called the Crime Stoppers tip line and he told them that he thought Robert had actually attacked Wendy, not the other way around, and that actually Robert was most likely behind some or all of these missing women from the downtown east side. Bill also said that a recent female party guest at the farm had seen a pile of women's clothing inside of Robert's trailer, along with at least 10 purses and women's ID cards. The police followed up with Lisa to confirm what she saw, but she was scared of Robert and said she wasn't going to cooperate. And so the police, without this testimony, were unable to secure a search warrant to investigate this further, and so they kind of just forgot about it and moved on to other cases. Over the next few years, the Pictons continued to throw these huge Piggy Palace parties until the city finally shut them down, and dozens more women disappeared from the downtown east side without a significant police investigation, despite the fact that Bill was calling them all the time to say he believed Robert Picton was behind all of these disappearances, but they weren't taking him seriously. Finally, in 2002, a former employee of the Picton farm came forward to police and said that he personally had seen illegal weapons inside of Robert's trailer. And this was enough information for the police to get a search warrant and raid the pig farm. And in February of that year, they did just that. And they found inside of Robert's trailer the illegal guns, as well as several items directly connected to some of the missing women from the downtown east side. Robert was arrested, but let out on bail. He was put under surveillance and told he could not go back to the farm until they were done conducting a more thorough search. And during that more thorough search, they found blood from one of the missing women inside of Robert's trailer. And so Robert was rearrested and charged with murder. While he was being held in jail, he shared his cell with another man who he believed was just another detainee. But he wasn't a detainee, he was actually an undercover police officer, and their entire interaction was being recorded. And on this recording, Robert makes a few shocking statements. Admits in this video he killed 49 people, who would turn out to be the majority of the missing women from the downtown east side. After a lengthy investigation, it was determined Robert's killing spree began in 1991, but it really kicked up a notch in 1996 when he and his brother started Piggy Palace, because he was able to use their huge parties to lure more victims to his farm faster. And once they were at his farm, he would lure them into his trailer, where he would handcuff them, tell them it's over now, and he would inject antifreeze into them, or he would strangle them to death. Afterwards, he would move the victim's body to the slaughterhouse, where he would butcher them like a pig. A large portion of his victim's remains would be fed to his pigs, and the parts he didn't feed to his pigs, he would bring to the rendering plant in the downtown east side, which is not far from where the victim was most likely picked up. A rendering plant takes animal waste products, crushes them up, and turns them into a gelatin. This gelatin is used in many everyday products, from candy to cosmetics, which means Robert's victims wound up in things like lipstick and gummy bears. Also, sometimes while Robert was going through this horrific disposal process, he would set aside some of the best cuts of meat and grind them up with pork and turn them into sausage. This sausage was served at Piggy Palace parties. It was also given to neighbors schools and food banks and orphanages. After sifting through 300,000 cubic meters of soil and pig feces underneath the Picton farm, investigators were only ever able to find little bits of remains of 26 women. Robert was charged with all 26 murders, but only 6 turned into convictions due to a lack of evidence. He was sentenced to life in prison and is still alive today. His brother and sister were never charged in connection with the crimes. So that's gonna do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments what it is and where you found it, so give us the timestamp, and if you're the first to do that, we'll pin you at the top of the comments section. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, please set the like button up for a practice sales call with William M. Buttlicker. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 3 or 4 video uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is MrBallen. I also have a second YouTube channel called MrBallen Shorts where I post random short videos and lost episodes. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's gonna do it. See ya. 18-year-old straight-A student Tyler Turner graduated from his high school in Central California. In the fall of that year, he was scheduled to go to the University of California, Merced with a full scholarship. He planned to study biochemical engineering because he was born with cerebral palsy and wanted to help other people with the condition. In August of that year, one of Tyler's friends said they wanted to go skydiving to celebrate their birthday. Tyler was nervous about it, but he had never done it before and figured, you know what, it'll be fun, I'll do it. His mother, Francine, who was very close with her son, was very nervous about her son jumping out of a plane, and so she asked if she could tag along to provide moral support and maybe take some pictures, and he said that was fine. So on the 6th of the month, Tyler and his mother hopped in the car and drove over an hour north to the Lodi Parachute Center, where they met up with Tyler's other 3 friends. They were all very nervous, but very excited. So the group went inside the main building, and Tyler went up to the counter and he paid $100 for a single tandem jump from 13,000 feet. A tandem jump is when 2 people jump together under one parachute. And so most commonly, you're gonna have the instructor who's got the parachute on his or her back, and then on their chest, harnessed at 4 different points, is gonna be their student or whoever they're jumping with, and they don't have a parachute. They're just tethered to the instructor who has the parachute. And so in this case, Tyler would be strapped on to his instructor. And so the advantage for Tyler as a first-time jumper is that he would not need to do anything once they're in free fall. The instructor would be 100% in control of keeping them steady in the air, of pulling the parachute, of dealing with any malfunctions, of flying the canopy, and of landing. It's all done by the instructor. After paying, Tyler and his mother walked over and met his instructor, the guy he'd be strapped onto. It was a 25-year-old man named Young Kwan who told him he had jumped over 700 times. And so Young told Tyler that he needed to watch a safety video before they did anything else. And so Tyler and his mother walked into the room, they sat down, the TV turned on, and a very simple safety video came on. And partway through it, another instructor walked in and just turned it off and told Tyler and his mother, you've seen enough, you guys can go. Francine was a little bit alarmed at this behavior because it seemed odd to skip over safety when you're jumping out of a plane for the first time, but she figured, you know what, they must know what they're doing, I'm sure it's fine. Just before 10 a.m., Young helped Tyler get into his tandem jump harness that would allow him to connect onto Young's chest, and then afterward, Tyler walked over to his mom, gave her a big hug, told her he loved her, and then he departed his mother and walked his way over to the staging area where he and the other jumpers, that included his friends, were waiting for the plane to start so they could actually board. While they waited, Tyler was really nervous, and his instructor picked up on it, and so to put Tyler at ease, he began filming Tyler and interviewing him about his upcoming jump to kind of make light of the whole situation, and it seemed to work. Recorded this video, the plane was ready to go, so it was time to start boarding, and so Tyler and his instructor walked over, but Tyler stopped on the tarmac, he took a knee and prayed, and then he stood back up, he turned to his mother, he waved one more time, and then he boarded the plane. After a little while, the plane took off, and then after a little while longer, it was up at 13,000 feet, flying in circular patterns, and that's when Francine started looking up, looking for her son, and at some point, she started seeing jumpers come out of the plane. And they were so far away, she couldn't possibly make out who was who, and so as the jumpers began pulling their parachutes, and all the different colored parachutes are lighting up the sky, she was trying to remember what color her son's parachute was, but she couldn't remember, and so she asked the other people that were watching, that were relatives or friends of the people up there, if they knew what color her son's parachute was, but nobody knew. As they got lower and lower, and you could actually start to make out who the jumpers were, she didn't see her son. And that's because her son's parachute never opened, and unfortunately his instructor, Yang, was not able to fix the malfunction or fire off the reserve, and so they both crashed into the ground, killing them both instantly. Tyler's family sued the owner of the parachute facility after they discovered Tyler's instructor, Yang, was not even certified to be an instructor, and so would not have received any of the required training on how to handle parachute malfunctions, and the owner knew about it. Investigators also discovered that 20 people had died skydiving at this facility under the same owner, a ridiculously high number of fatalities that most people involved are attributing to the owner's general disregard for safety. And ultimately, a judge agreed with that sentiment and awarded the Turner family $40 million from the owner of this facility. In 1962, Chileno Sanchez was born into a poor family in the Mexican state of Sinaloa. When he was just 15 years old, one of his sisters was assaulted by a very rich and powerful man in their town, and so he never got punished for it. 2 years later, when Chileno was 17, he saw this man at a party and he walked up to him and shot him in the head, killing him instantly. After the murder, Chileno fled to Tijuana before ultimately crossing the US border into Los Angeles, where he stayed with his aunt. He worked odd jobs like picking vegetables and selling cars before he ultimately went into business with his brother, who was back in Mexico, and he worked with him to smuggle Mexicans into the US. But that operation stopped in 1984 when his brother was murdered in Tijuana. To commemorate his brother, Chileno, who always loved music, wrote a song about him. And he formatted the song in the typical Mexican ballad style called corrido, but his lyrics were graphic and gritty, something nobody else did when they wrote a corrido. Chileno spoke honestly and openly, not only about how his brother was killed, but also the struggles of living around drug trafficking and violence in Mexico. Shortly after writing the song, Chileno wound up in jail in Tijuana, Mexico, and while he was there, he would sing the song he wrote about his brother, and other inmates heard it and loved it. They had never heard a corrido sung like that. And so they asked Chileno if he would write songs about them and their exploits. Soon, Chileno was being commissioned by all these inmates in this prison to write their songs in exchange for money and for favors. When Chileno got out of prison, his unique songwriting abilities had spread beyond the prison walls to other criminals and drug traffickers and kingpins in Mexico, and before long, Chileno was being approached by those people to write their songs. His corridos pioneered a new subgenre of music called narco corrido for their ties to the narcotics industry. Some people today compare the style and lyrics of the narco corrido to gangster rap. By 1987, Chileno's music was not just being shared amongst his paying clients. It had spread into Los Angeles and all over Mexico and was becoming very popular, even though it wasn't being played on the radio because radios thought his lyrics were too graphic. And so it was spreading largely because of word of mouth and because Chileno himself would go to car washes and street corners and he would sell his cassettes to anybody who would take them. By 1991, Chileno was so famous that he actually went on tour, and everywhere he went, the venue would be completely sold out. But given what his narco corridos were about, largely about drug trafficking and the people that are involved in that ecosystem, the people that would actually come to his performances were often rough and dangerous people, or were at least tied to rough and dangerous people. In 1992, when Chileno was performing in California, while he was on stage, this 33-year-old guy rushed onto stage with him and drew a gun on him, and Chileno, who was always carrying a weapon himself, drew his pistol and fired at this guy first. And then what ensued was this crazy gunfight on stage, practically point blank, between Chileno and this guy. And they both managed to shoot each other. Chileno got shot in the lung, and this guy got shot in the mouth. They would both survive. But 8 audience members also got shot, and one of them actually died. This made international headlines and, by all accounts, should have devastated Chileno's career. But in fact, it had the opposite effect. It made him 10 times more famous because Chileno, he was representing narco corrido music. And so in being the face of that, he kind of represented drug trafficking and criminals and outlaws all over Mexico and in the United States. And so he was kind of representing a very tough group of people. And so for him to have stood his ground on stage and shot first at this guy coming to attack him, it made him look brave. It made him look like a warrior. It validated him as the the right person to be the face of Narco Corridos. But Chileno also understood that this probably was not the last time that someone was going to try to hurt him. That in virtue of being the face of narco culture, there's bound to be people that are very violent that don't like him, and they might come after him too. And so he actually told his inner circle that he thought his days were numbered, that at some point someone was going to kill him. 4 months after the shootout, Chileno was back home in Sinaloa, Mexico, performing at a concert that his friends had told him he shouldn't do because he had lots of enemies in his hometown. But Chileno really wanted to do it. He got into the venue, he got on stage, his band was getting ready, thousands of people were coming into the audience, and before the show started, somebody handed him a note. And so Chileno takes the note, he's smiling, he's kind of looking around at the crowd, and then he looks down at the note and he reads it, and right away his expression completely changes. He looks distressed, he rubs his brow, he frowns, he kind of looks up at the crowd like he's looking for someone, and then he just goes blank in the face, and he's looking out like he's looking past the crowd. And it's this long period of time where he's just blank staring into the audience. And then all of a sudden he just snaps out of it, takes the note, puts it in his pocket, picks up the microphone, and proceeds to give one of his best live performances to date. After the concert was over, Chileno made a special effort to say bye to everybody in his band, and he said bye to some people in the crowd, and then finally, after this kind of long drawn out goodbye, he walked out the back door. Shortly after, he was kidnapped, tied up, and then shot in the back of the head, execution style. It would turn out that note he received on stage was from his killers, who we don't know exactly who they are still to this day, but the note said, after this performance, we're going to kill you. And so that was the reason Chileno was so distressed, because whoever it was, he obviously understood it was a credible threat. But instead of panicking, he just decided he would give an amazing performance and then face his destiny. And so when he went outside, he knew he was going to get murdered. And he did. Here is the moment Chileno was handed that note on stage, informing him he had been marked for death. There is already tons of shocking content on the internet. There is still something truly insane about Wu Yongning's videos. In 2017, Wu was a 26-year-old climbing enthusiast who was dubbed China's first rooftopper. A rooftopper is someone who, usually illegally, climbs onto rooftops, cranes, smokestacks, big antennas, skyscrapers, or any other really high, dangerous location. Almost always, these daredevils are going to these incredibly dangerous locations in order to capture footage of themselves so they can post it to the internet in hopes that it goes viral and they become famous and make a bunch of money. But because there are so many people competing for the internet's attention, rooftoppers really need to push the envelope if they want to stand out and make it big. And Wu Yongning did just that, and the internet rewarded him with millions of followers and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Most rooftoppers would go to the tops of these incredible locations and then take selfies of themselves standing there posing at the top. Wu would do that, but he also did a couple other things that nobody else was doing that kind of became his trademarks. The first one was he would dangle over the edge of the building or the crane or the antenna that he was holding onto, and he would do pull-ups, but he would keep doing them until he reached muscle failure and then would barely be able to pull himself back up to safety. Another trademark move is he would go to the top of these huge buildings and he would get right on the edge and he would do a handstand and then he would pull one arm back. So he's doing a one-armed handstand and then he would tilt his body as far as he could over the edge until he couldn't do it any farther and he'd let himself come back over to safety. And then perhaps the most difficult to watch trademark was when Wu would basically run up to the edge of buildings and stop just short. And he wouldn't just run to the edge, he would use a self-balancing scooter and go as fast as he could right to the edge of the building and stop just short. And over again, he'd go right to the edge and stop, where he's literally an inch away from tumbling off the edge. Or he'd line himself up where he knew exactly how far he was from the edge, and he would do these really aggressive somersaults forward, and he would stop with his legs dangling off the edge of the building. And of course, all of these trademark moves were done without any safety equipment, and most times Wu did these stunts without anybody there to potentially pull him back up if he gets stuck. About 3/4 of the way through 2017, Wu had posted over 500 videos and live streaming clips to various social media sites, and he was starting to make some real money off of it. On one video sharing site alone, he had made over $80,000 just from donations that had come in. And so it was clear this was becoming a career. But as the money and the fame were coming into Wu, he started to realize that in order for him to stay on top and keep earning at this level, he would need to continuously outperform his last big stunt. And already he was brushing up against death on virtually every video he took. In early November of that year, Wu heard about a competition that was offering $15,000 to its winner. The details of this competition are hazy at best, but from the sounds of it, it was a viral video competition. Make the most viral video and you win the prize. This competition served as motivation for Wu to finally attempt his craziest stunt yet. He figured if he had the footage of this particular stunt, he was sure to win this competition, and with the prize money, he could pay for his wedding and cover his mother's medical expenses. And so on November 8th, Wu traveled to the Huaiyan International Center in central China. This massive 62-story skyscraper would be the tallest building Wu had ever performed a stunt on. The public was only able to get up to the 44th floor, and so Wu had to take the elevator up to somewhere between the 40th and 44th floor, at which point he climbed out of a window and free climbed his way all the way up to the top, so 20 additional floors just climbing the side of a skyscraper. Once he got to the rooftop, he set up his tripod and his camera, and he turned on his live stream. And then he walked around and he began preparing himself for the stunt. Live stream viewers that tuned in would see Wu sitting on the edge of the skyscraper, and he's meticulously wiping down the edge of this building. It's the area he'll be grabbing onto to perform his stunt, which was going to be his trademark pull-ups. And so after several minutes of Wu cleaning this ledge, he begins to lower himself where his arms are still tucked up over the ledge. So he's not hanging, he's got his arms kind of anchored on the top. He's like testing the edge of this lip. And he kind of feels around and he can tell that it's not a good grip. It's not good enough for him to go down to a full extension. And so he pulls himself back up and he goes back to wiping down the edge. And from the looks of it, it seems like Wu is actually pretty nervous about this stunt. And normally when you watch Wu's videos, he doesn't seem nervous at all, even leading up to his stunt. But this one just seemed different. And so after again wiping down this ledge as much as he possibly could, he gets himself ready, lowers himself onto his arms, he lets his legs drop over the edge of the building, and then he goes to full extension. And from there, he does 2 complete pull-ups, and then after the second pull-up, he begins to try to pull himself back up to safety. But he's fatigued and he can't quite get himself up over the edge. He starts to use his feet to try to use the glass to push himself back up, but he can't get a grip. And for the next 15 seconds, Wu is desperately trying to get himself up and over this ledge. He's trying to muscle himself up, but it's obvious he's completely fatigued. I mean, he did free climb almost 20 stories to get up there, and so it makes sense his arms would be tired. But there's nobody up there to help pull him up. And so after a while, he goes back to full extension because he can't do anything, and he looks down as if he's sizing up if he can survive this fall, which he obviously can't. And then the camera picks up a sort of whimpering sound that appears to come from Wu, and then he loses his grip and he falls to his death. Here is a segment of his final video right before he fell. Do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's video, let us know in the comments what it is and where you found it, so give us the timestamp, and if you're the first to do that, we'll pin you at the top of the comments section. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, please replace the like button sleeping pills with caffeine pills right before their 14-hour flight from Hawaii to Okinawa, Japan. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 3 or 4 video uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is MrBallen. I also have a second YouTube channel called MrBallen Shorts where I post random short videos and lost episodes. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya. In 2019, a 32-year-old United States Army soldier was stationed in Hawaii for training. This was his first time ever being in Hawaii, and so on his first day off, he planned to do some sightseeing. After doing some research, he settled on the Hawaii Volcano National Park as the first place he would go check out. This is one of the top tourist attractions in Hawaii that sees over 2 million yearly visitors. One of the main draws of this particular park is that it's home to one of the world's most active volcanoes, the Kilauea, that has been erupting consistently almost every year since 1983. On the evening of Wednesday, May 1st, John finally was given some time off, and so he hopped in his rental car and he made his way out to the park. When he got there, he was pleasantly surprised to see that it was not crowded in the least, most likely because he was there midweek. And so he paid his entrance fee, and then he started walking up a trail that would bring him up to this overlook that overlooked the caldera. The caldera of a volcano is the actual crater, the inside of the volcano where the actual lava comes out of. At the time John was at the park, the volcano was not actively erupting, and so there was no pool of lava inside of the caldera. However, the surface of the caldera, which was 300 feet below this overlook where John is, the surface was still 2100 degrees Fahrenheit, causing these massive steam clouds to billow up from it pretty much constantly. And so when John actually reached this overlook point and was looking out into the caldera, he was immediately disappointed because he couldn't see anything. And so as much as John craned his neck to try to get a better look down into the caldera, he was just totally obscured by the steam. Now, he was up against a safety railing that prevented people from getting closer, but he figured if he could just get right to the edge of this crater and he could actually look down inside, he might be able to see all the way to the base of the caldera. And so he looked around and noticed there were no other tourists up there with him. So he thought about it for a second and then decided, yep, I'm gonna do this. And he stepped over the safety railing and walked right to the edge of this crater overlooking this caldera. And as soon as he got there, he suddenly had this unencumbered view of the space directly at the bottom of the edge of the cliff. He could actually see down into the caldera now. And so he got his phone out and he started taking some pictures. And then all of a sudden, the ground underneath him began to shift. And it shifted so quickly and so suddenly that it threw him onto his back. And as he's laying on his back, scrambling to get back up again, the ground underneath him just completely collapses, sending him careening down 300 feet into the scalding hot caldera. When John fell, another tourist did happen to walk up another nearby trail, and they actually saw him as he fell. And so they called 911, and immediately first responders were on scene, but they were facing the same issue that John was, which is the steam was so intense inside of this volcano that you can't really see down into it. And so they had rescuers walking along the rim of the volcano, and they had helicopters in the air, but it really wasn't doing any good. And in the back of all rescuers' minds, they knew that realistically, there's just no way John could have survived this. I mean, you can't survive a 300-foot fall, but even if you did, you couldn't survive being at the surface of the caldera that's over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. You die within a couple of minutes. But the rescuers pushed that thought out of their mind, and they focused on being positive and just continuing to look for John. And 2 hours into their search, when it was totally dark outside and hope was just about gone at this point, somebody spotted John on a little ledge jutting out 70 feet down from that cliff he was standing on. When he fell, when the ground dissolved underneath him, he managed to land on this tiny little ledge. Had he fallen an inch left, an inch right, an inch forward, he would have tumbled to his death. There's no two ways about it. But he landed perfectly on the one ledge that could have saved his life. But he was so badly injured, he couldn't climb back up again. However, rescuers were able to rappel down to him, put him in a harness, get him back up, and he was able to make a full recovery. On July 12th, 2015, 30-year-old Christopher LeCun was out on his boat with his wife, his kids, and his best friend Robert just off the coast of Port St. Lucie in Florida. Throughout the day, anytime Chris or Robert were looking down from the boat and spotted a rock pile, they would throw on their scuba tanks and dive down to attempt to find lobsters. Towards the end of the day, when they were looking down into the water, they saw what they thought was a rock pile at first, but as they kept looking at it, they noticed it had lots of straight lines, indicating it could be an underwater building. Chris and Robert noticed there was a yellow buoy floating on the surface right above where this building was underwater. And they thought they should probably go over and read it, but they decided, it's inconsequential. We can just go down and check it out for ourselves. Now, if they had stopped and gone over and read the buoy first, they would have seen there was a warning on it that was telling people to stay back at least 100 feet from this underwater structure. But Robert and Chris didn't read that warning, so they put on their scuba tanks and they dove down into the water. And after only going down about 10 feet, they noticed there wasn't just one structure underwater. There were actually 3 huge structures. And so Chris and Robert looked at each other and they're totally amazed at what they're looking at. They had been scuba diving together since they were young kids, and they'd spent a lot of time in these waters, but they had never seen these before. And so they were very excited to go down and have a look. When they got down there and they were only a couple feet away from one of these structures, Chris saw that the top of the building was just a square concrete slab, and then on all 4 sides there were big concrete slabs. But at the top of each of the 4 walls of this building were what appeared to be openings. They were almost like windows at the top of the structure. And across the window window was mesh all the way around, like a grate, protecting things from going into the window and into the structure. And so Chris and Robert went right up to the mesh and tried to look inside of the structure just to see what was in there. But when they looked, it was just too dark inside and there was no way to tell what was in there. And so Chris is really disheartened because he really wanted to know what was inside of this building. And so he just grabs the mesh itself and just kind of tries to tug it in one direction just to see if it would even move, to maybe create some space so he could look inside. And it very easily slid all the way to the side, revealing an opening big enough for he and Robert to go through. And so the two of them look at each other and they just nod because they know they want to go inside and see what's in there. And so Chris went in, followed by Robert, and they found themselves inside of just this big empty space, this 70-foot by 70-foot space where there really was nothing inside of it, except down at the very bottom on one wall was this 16-foot wide opening that was the entrance to a huge tunnel. And from where Chris and Robert were at the top of the inside of the structure, they couldn't see into the tunnel. And so they decided, by looking at each other and nodding once more, that they would just go down and try to look to see if they could see through to the other side of this tunnel. And so Chris goes down first, followed by Robert, and as they start making their way down, they both start to feel a current that's pulling them straight down. And as soon as they felt that, they both intuitively knew that they didn't want to be a part of that, and they started swimming as fast as they could back up towards their exit. Robert, who was a little bit higher than Christopher, was able to escape the pull of this current and got up to the top of the inside of the structure towards the exit. Chris, on the other hand, was not able to escape this current's grasp and was actually pulled backwards into the tunnel where he disappeared. Robert had actually turned around and saw his friend get pulled into that tunnel, but he knew there was nothing he could do, and so he just turned around, swam out of the structure, and up to the boat as fast as he could to call 911. Once Chris had been pulled into this dark tunnel, he began tumbling backwards. He had no control over his body position. The current was just way too strong. And so Chris instinctively grabbed his mouthpiece and anchored it inside of his mouth, and then he grabbed his mask and did his best to keep that on his face. Because as he was tumbling, the current kept trying to pull those things off of him. As Chris tumbled through this pitch black tunnel, he began to realize that more than likely he's going to encounter some very powerful pump that's sucking this water through this pipe in the first place, or some huge turbine that has something to do with pulling the water through this pipe. And in both of those situations, once Chris reaches the end of this tunnel, he's going to get cut up and get killed. And so Chris thought about pulling his mouthpiece out to just end it right then and there to avoid this horribly violent death. But he thought about his family, he thought about his kids, and he just couldn't bring himself to do it. And so he just continued to hold on to his mouthpiece and his mask and just continued to tumble with no control in total darkness, having no clue where he was going. After over 5 minutes of this just nightmare situation for Chris, he suddenly sees a very small flicker of light at the very far end of the tunnel in the direction they're being pulled towards. And all he can think of is, okay, well, whatever that light is, that's the area where I'm gonna get killed. There's gonna be some pump or some turbine right out there. And so he's bracing himself for this terrible, violent end to his life. But as they got closer and closer and that light continued to grow, Chris got a better picture every time he would tumble around. He'd get a look, and it did not look like there were spinning blades of death or some pump in there. It actually looked like very peaceful, calm water with sunlight pushing through it. And sure enough, after he got shot out into this lit up area, the current kind of died down and stopped. Chris immediately began swimming right up towards the surface where there was actually land right in front of him. He was inside of what looked like this huge building, and he saw there were people walking around with hard hats. And so Chris just pulled himself out of the water and began yelling for help. It would turn out Chris had been pulled into a nuclear power plant's cooling system. This particular nuclear power plant used a multi-level system where instead of just pulling the water in directly into the plant where it would be cooled and there would be, a pump of death or spinning turbines or something like that, instead there was a reservoir first where the water was dumped, and then after a while that reservoir water would then get churned up into the cooling system. So Chris was just incredibly lucky that that was just the way this nuclear power plant was built, because many other nuclear power plants, if he had done what he did, he would have been killed in a really horrible way. Chris would ultimately sue the power plant, saying they didn't put up enough warning signs or enough deterrents to protect people from getting sucked into these intake pipes, and the power plant has countered by saying, we put up enough deterrents, you just went past them on purpose. As of now, it's unclear what came of that court case. In 1990, 46-year-old Alex Kirstich was a marine biology high school teacher by day and a documentary filmmaker by night. In July of that year, he and 3 of his friends were in Mexico working on a documentary about sea life in the Gulf of California. They had already shot a bunch of footage during the daytime, and now they needed to go out and get some nighttime footage as well. On the evening of the 25th, Alex and his 3 friends boarded a 70-foot research vessel with all of their diving and camera equipment. They waited until just before sunset to leave the harbor, and then it was a 30-minute transit to this area just north of La Paz that they had been told was very active at night. Once the ship was stopped, they threw their anchor down and then turned on these bright spotlights and aimed them into the water. And then one of the ship's crew members put a big piece of tuna onto his fishing rod and then cast it out into the water to try to lure some animals to the area. A few moments later, a black mass suddenly came up to the surface, ripped the tuna from the line, and then vanished as quickly as it appeared. Alex and his 3 friends didn't get a good look at it. They saw it happen, but they had no idea what it was. So they told the ship crew member to put another piece of tuna on the line, throw it out there, and see if they can get a better look at this thing. And so more tuna was put on the rod, it was cast out, and then seconds later, a black mass rushed up to the surface, grabbed the tuna, and then went back down again. But this time, with Alex and the others looking really intently at it, they picked up what looked like a red and white flash, like a strobe light on the skin of this creature as it descended down below. And they looked at each other and they thought, could it be? And so another piece of tuna was put on the fishing rod, they cast it out into the water, and this time, before anything could come up and take it, deep down below, they see a flash of red and white all over the place, like a bunch of strobe lights going off. And then dozens of these creatures rocketed to the surface, fought over this tuna, and then descended back down into the deep water. And so now the men look at each other and they're grinning because they know the red and white flashing they are seeing is a trademark of a very rare creature. It's their skin changing colors. It's how they communicate with each other. And this creature is so rare that at this time, no one had actually filmed it alive. There was only footage of it dead after it washed up on shore. And so suddenly Alex and his team are thinking, man, our documentary is about to become legendary if we can just get in there and get the footage. And so the men eagerly put on their dive equipment, got their cameras, and prepared to enter the water. Had they consulted with anyone who studied this rare creature, they would have been told that getting in the water with them was a horrible idea and could easily get them killed. These rare creatures are called Humboldt squids, and they are 8-foot-long apex predators that live in the deepest parts of the ocean. Because they almost never come up to the shallow waters, we know very little about them. What we do know is that, like all other squids, they have 8 arms along with 2 long tentacles that have all these suckers on it, and inside of the suckers are these teeth, these little daggers that they use to latch onto their prey, and then they pull their prey in towards their center, and at their center is this opening. It's their mouth, and it's called a beak, and it literally looks like a bird's beak. It's this hard thing that sits there and opens and shuts, and they use it to bite into their prey. And then inside of their beak is their tongue, and on their tongue are hundreds of sharp little daggers like more teeth that they also use to shred their prey. Typically, these jumbo squid will sneak underneath their prey and then suddenly shoot up, grab them with their 2 tentacles, and then drag them down to the deeper water where they feel safe. And then they begin the horrifyingly slow process of eating their prey alive because they have a gag reflex that prevents them from eating quickly. Humboldt squids are very intelligent, they're very social, and they're very aggressive towards humans, especially when they are in a large group or when they are eating. But of course, Alex and his 3 friends are not thinking about this. They're just eager to get into those jumbo squid-infested waters and get this footage. And so they give each other the final okays. They're ready, their equipment's good to go, and they slip off the side of the boat into the water. Once they were in the water, they sank down to 30 feet, at which point they spread out around the squid that were still darting up to the edge of the boat to try to get more tuna. After a few minutes of Alex and his buddies taking this great footage of these squids, a 14-foot shark suddenly comes into the mix and tries to eat the tuna off the side of the boat. But ironically, on its way out after not getting any tuna, the shark got its tail fins stuck on the actual hook and then became bait for the Humboldt squids. And seconds later, these squids began ripping the shark apart. And so Alex and his 3 friends decided to move closer to the drama to get some great footage. As Alex is right up next to this drama unfolding, he feels himself suddenly sinking in the water. And he's kind of fixated on getting the shot, so he's not really worried about why he's sinking. He's thinking maybe my buoyancy compensator compensators off, maybe my weights are too heavy. But when he looks down, he realizes in horror, a Humboldt squid has wrapped one of its tentacles around his right swim fin. And so he instinctively begins kicking the squid's tentacle with his left leg. He gets it to release him, and in a panic, Alex begins swimming back up towards the surface. But he's still 40 feet away at this point from the boat. And at this point, the other squid had been alerted to Alex as now being considered prey. And so as Alex is going up, from behind, another squid comes up and wraps its tentacle around his neck. And his neck was the only area on his body that was not protected by his neoprene wetsuit. And so the daggers inside of these suckers on this tentacle dug into his neck, all around his neck. So his neck's being cut into and he's being strangled and being pulled down by this squid. And so Alex begins punching and squeezing and pulling on this tentacle, fighting for his life. And he manages to get this squid, the second one, also to release him. But by now, he's been pulled down to 50 feet. He's got a ways to go to get back to the boat. And the other squid are all coming over. They're converging on him because they're all communicating that here's our prey, here's our other meal. And so Alex tries to swim as fast as he can back to the boat, but he only made it a few feet before another Humboldt squid darted up and came right up to his face, wrapped both tentacles around his entire head, blinding him, and he immediately felt the beak pressed up against his face, and it was opening and closing, trying to bite him, but it was biting down on his dive mask that was basically saving him from having his skull crushed by this squid. The squid became frustrated because it's not digging into Alex's flesh, and so it readjusted its grip on him by sliding down to his midsection, where immediately it begins pulling him down violently in these pulsing bursts. And so all Alex starts doing is punching, hitting, and doing everything he can to get this thing off of him. And then for some reason, it does release him. Maybe it was just so frustrated that it could not puncture into him. And so Alex is now down to about 60 feet, and he starts swimming as fast as he can with all these squids all around him. But for some reason, none of them attacked him. And so Alex swims up to the boat, and before he actually gets on board, he looks down back into the water, and there's just dozens of these squids that are flashing red and white at each other, just kind of hovering in the water, not making any move towards him. It was like they were just watching him. Alex sprinted up that ladder, got into the boat, and shortly after, his three friends came out of the water as well. They were unharmed. Alex had deep cuts all around his neck from where the tentacles had driven their teeth into his throat. But besides that, he was physically okay. Mentally, he was a train wreck and was very traumatized from this event, as you could imagine. Today, his encounter with the jumbo squids is a thing of legend in the diving community. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments what it is and where you found it. So give us the timestamp. And if you're the first to do that, we will pin you at the top of the comments section. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, please ask the like button if they know where Bell's Canyon is. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 3 or 4 video uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is MrBallen. I also have a second YouTube channel called MrBallen Shorts, where I post random short videos and lost episodes. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.